Cole Matthews had grown up with the land. Every daybreak found him tending to his modest Midwestern farm, a patchwork of fields that had been in his family for generations. For Cole, farming wasn't just a livelihood, it was a way of life, a sacred connection to his ancestors' sweat and sacrifice. His pride and joy was a vintage tractor, lovingly restored over countless weekends. The tractor wasn't merely a machine, it was a living relic of simpler times, a symbol of hard work, family traditions, and the freedom to work the land on one's own terms. Cole's farmhouse, with its wraparound porch and weathered red barn, overlooked endless rows of corn and soybean fields. Every furrow in his fields told a story, and every sunset cast a golden glow over memories that he guarded fiercely. He took solace in the quiet rhythm of rural life, a stark contrast to the relentless pace of modern cities. But the tranquility of his world was about to be disrupted by a force he had long suspected was creeping into every corner of the neighborhood: the overreaching authority of the Homeowners Association. At the heart of that authority was Kerren Leland, the self-appointed enforcer of HOA standards. Kerren prided herself on her immaculate wardrobe, a perfectly pressed blazer and a crisp blouse, and on her unyielding belief that every property in the community must mirror her ideal of perfection. For years, she'd issued fines for the smallest deviations, whether it was an overhanging tree branch or a mailbox that wasn't aligned just so. To her, personal expression was a threat to uniformity. One hot summer afternoon, as Cole was preparing to wrap up his day's work and admire his prized tractor parked beside the barn, he noticed something utterly out of place. Children were laughing and scampering around the gleaming machine, the very tractor that had been in his family for decades. Upon closer inspection, he discovered that the children weren't his, they were Kerren's. Without his permission, Kerren had allowed her kids to clamber aboard his tractor, treating it as a free playground. Cole's heart sank. His tractor represented years of dedication and was a cherished piece of his heritage. The thought that someone, especially the HOA enforcer herself, would treat it as a mere toy was infuriating. Later that day, as Cole confronted Kerren at his farmhouse, the tension was palpable. Standing on his front step, he locked eyes with her as she arrived with a look of self-righteous satisfaction. "Cole," she began in a measured tone, "it has come to our attention that you're not maintaining your property in accordance with the HOA standards. Allowing unauthorized use of your tractor disrupts the order we expect in this community." Cole's voice was low but resolute. "Kerren, my tractor is not a public plaything. It's part of my livelihood, a piece of my family's legacy. I don't appreciate you letting your kids use it without my consent." Her lips curled into a tight smile. "Rules are rules, Mr. Matthews. I expect you to secure your property and ensure that such disturbances do not recur." As neighbors peeked from behind curtains and over picket fences, the confrontation became an open display of the power struggle at the heart of the community. Cole felt both betrayed and incensed. He knew that this incident was not an isolated act of mischief. It was a symptom of a broader pattern of HOA overreach. Determined not to let Kerren's meddling erode his hard-won independence, Cole silently vowed that he would take every measure necessary to protect his property and his way of life. That night, as the cicadas droned and the stars blinked above his fields, Cole sat on his porch and mulled over his next steps. He'd already begun installing a new security system around his barn and tractor shed, and now he realized he must document every further intrusion. This was just the opening salvo in a conflict that would soon pit his deep-rooted sense of freedom against Kerren's relentless, bureaucratic tyranny. The following morning, Cole awoke to find an official envelope taped to his weathered door. The letter, stamped with the HOA's emblem, was a formal notice and fine of $750 for violating community equipment standards. The document cited the unauthorized use of his tractor by non-resident children as evidence of his neglect in protecting his property. Stepping outside into the early light, Cole found Kerren waiting by the mailbox, her expression as stern and smug as ever. "Good morning, Mr. Matthews," she said crisply. "I trust you've received our notice. Our community standards apply equally to all, and you are required to secure your property immediately." Cole's grip tightened on the envelope. "Kerren, that fine is outrageous. My tractor is a family heirloom, and the kids playing on it were not invited. I consider this act vandalism of my property." Kerren's smile remained fixed, almost imperious. "Rules are rules. If your property isn't maintained according to our standards, you are subject to fines and corrective measures. I suggest you take care of this matter promptly, or you will face further action." Later that day, Cole visited the local zoning office for guidance. A sympathetic official confirmed that while property owners must maintain their premises, there was no legal basis for punishing him for an act of mischief instigated by the HOA's own negligence. Energized by this validation, Cole began gathering evidence. He took detailed photographs of his tractor, the surrounding barn, and even the playful footprints left by the unauthorized visitors. He also set up his newly installed security cameras to record any further intrusions. At a small gathering at the local feed store, a neighbor confided, "Kerren's been letting her kids run wild all over town. It's not just your tractor. She's even allowed them to play on community vehicles. It's about control, and she loves the power trip." Cole realized that this fine was merely the first move in Kerren's ongoing campaign to assert dominance over the neighborhood. That evening, as he reviewed the photos and video clips, Cole resolved that he would not stand for this abuse of power. Not only would he contest the fine, but he would also expose the hypocrisy of an HOA that claimed to uphold standards while enabling its own children to run amok on private property. In the days following the incident, Kerren's tactics grew increasingly aggressive. While the fine was meant to intimidate, it only fanned the flames of Cole's determination. Anonymous notices began appearing on the doorsteps of other homeowners, citations for improper equipment usage, and unauthorized public play areas. Rumors swirled that Kerren's control extended far beyond her own children's antics, and many residents whispered that fines were being imposed simply to bolster the HOA's coffers. Late one evening, in the quiet of his farmhouse office, Cole pored over past HOA meeting minutes and financial reports, uncovering evidence that Kerren and her cronies had been using arbitrary fines to extract money from residents. The more he read, the more it became clear that the system was rigged to keep everyone in line. A few board members, emboldened by private conversations, even hinted that donations to the HOA were less about community improvement and more about feeding Kerren's desire for control. Armed with this damning information, Cole reconfigured his security cameras to capture every angle of his property, especially the area around his tractor. He began documenting every instance of what he now saw as blatant abuse of power. When another neighbor received a fine for letting his dog run freely, Cole quietly recorded a conversation in which the board member admitted, "We're just ensuring everyone stays in line." At the next HOA meeting, held in a sterile community center with flickering fluorescent lights, Cole stepped up. Clutching a thick folder filled with photographs, video clips, and signed affidavits from fellow homeowners, he addressed the tense crowd. "What we're witnessing," he declared, "is not about maintaining community standards. It's about bullying homeowners for profit and power. My tractor, which you allowed your children to play on, was a private possession, a part of my family's legacy. Yet you fine me as if I were negligent. This is abuse." Murmurs rippled through the room as several residents nodded in agreement. Kerren, standing at the front, attempted to dismiss his claims with a rehearsed retort. "Mr. Matthews, your evidence is circumstantial. Our rules are clear and apply to everyone equally. If you have an issue with how things are run, perhaps you should reconsider your membership in this community." But the seeds of dissent had been sown. The room buzzed with discontent, and many began questioning the very legitimacy of Kerren's authority. Cole's resolve only hardened as he realized that the fight was about far more than a single fine. It was about standing up against an entrenched system of intimidation. Tensions reached a boiling point one sultry afternoon when Kerren decided to take her crusade even further. Claiming that Cole's failure to secure his tractor was causing a public disturbance and endangering community safety, she sent a team of HOA inspectors to his property. Under the pretense of ensuring compliance, they inspected every inch of his farm, their clipboards rattling as they documented supposed violations. Cole, watching from his porch, felt his blood boil. He marched out to confront the inspectors. "You have no right to treat my property like a public park," he shouted. "My tractor is not a playground for your kids or any children. I'm a property owner, and I demand respect for my rights." Amid the chaos, a spark of inspiration ignited in Cole's mind. If Kerren was determined to use the tractor as a stage for her misguided display of authority, then perhaps it was time to give her a taste of her own medicine. That very evening, while the inspectors left and Kerren seethed in frustration, Cole accessed his security system. He logged into the controls of his vintage tractor, a machine that had faithfully served his family for decades, and locked its ignition controls. The tractor's dashboard now displayed an impenetrable locked message, effectively rendering it unusable. When Kerren's children returned the next day to resume their impromptu play session, they found the tractor unresponsive. Their laughter turned to confusion and then panic as attempts to start the engine met only with silent refusal. Hidden cameras captured every moment. The kids' puzzled faces, frantic calls for their mother, and Kerren's exasperated reaction as she arrived to find her plans thwarted once again. At the next HOA meeting, Cole presented the security footage, a powerful, silent indictment of the arbitrary meddling that had led to this farce. The video showed in vivid detail the moment the tractor's controls were locked and the subsequent chaos among Kerren's children. The room filled with gasps and murmurs as homeowners realized that the very symbol of Cole's heritage had been transformed into a weapon of poetic retribution. Kerren's response was feeble. "This is an overreaction," she insisted, but her voice wavered as the evidence spoke for itself. The homeowner support for Cole swelled that day, and a murmur of collective defiance spread through the crowd. It wasn't just about the tractor. It was about reclaiming autonomy and dignity in the face of arbitrary power. Cole's counterstrike had not only disrupted Kerren's plans, but had also united the community. Neighbors began sharing their own stories of arbitrary fines and invasive inspections, and the atmosphere of fear that had once pervaded the neighborhood began to lift. In that pivotal moment, Cole's simple act of locking the tractor's controls became a symbol of resistance, a demonstration that no one, not even an overbearing HOA president, could dictate how a family should live on their own land. Realizing that her authority was slipping, Kerren grew increasingly desperate. Determined to reassert control, she hatched one final plan. Early one foggy morning, Kerren arrived at Cole's farm with a small contingent of HOA enforcers and a thick folder of legal documents. Her goal was to conduct an urgent compliance check on his property, and, if necessary, to seize the tractor altogether. With a steely glint in her eye, Kerren marched up to Cole's front door. "Mr. Matthews," she declared, "your persistent noncompliance has left me no choice. I am here to enforce our community standards by taking possession of your tractor, which you have continuously allowed to become a public hazard." Her tone brooked no argument. Cole, who had been monitoring the situation via his security cameras, stepped outside calmly. "Kerren, you've crossed every boundary. My tractor is my property, and you know it. I have every piece of evidence documenting your repeated overreach. Today, you will have to answer for your actions." Undeterred, Kerren ordered her enforcers to approach the tractor. As they reached for the machine, Cole activated his remote system, once again locking the controls. The tractor remained inert, a silent rebuke to Kerren's latest attempt at authority. Confusion rippled through her group as she fumbled through her legal jargon, trying to justify the seizure. At that exact moment, Cole's hidden cameras captured every detail. Kerren's frustrated outburst, the enforcers' hesitant glances, and the stark realization on the faces of Kerren's children as they peeked from behind her, witnessing their mother's desperate bid for control. Within minutes, several neighbors, alerted by the commotion, arrived on the scene, their smartphones recording the unfolding debacle. The situation escalated rapidly. Calls to local law enforcement were made by multiple residents, and soon, uniformed officers arrived. Reviewing the security footage on their portable devices, the officers were quick to recognize that Kerren's actions constituted a blatant abuse of power. "This is a clear case of harassment and unauthorized property seizure," one officer stated firmly. In the glare of the morning sun, and before an increasingly outraged crowd, Kerren's final, desperate move collapsed. "This isn't over," she hissed as she was forced back, her voice barely audible over the murmurs of discontent. But her authority was irreparably damaged. The tractor, locked and unyielding, stood as the final testament to Cole's defiance. In the days that followed, the community's collective outrage could no longer be contained. Homeowners convened emergency town hall meetings at the community center, where the full extent of Kerren's arbitrary actions was laid bare through Cole's meticulously compiled evidence. Video clips of her failed seizure attempt, security photos of a locked tractor, and testimonials from neighbors filled the room with a resounding chorus of disapproval. At a pivotal vote, the residents unanimously agreed that Kerren Leland's reign had come to an end. With one decisive ballot after another, she was formally removed from the HOA board. The news spread rapidly. Local media picked up the story, dubbing it the tractor standoff, and headlines soon declared that the HOA would be overhauled in the wake of Kerren's downfall. Within days, the board was forced to resign en masse, and an independent audit was launched to review years of misappropriated funds and arbitrary fines. For Cole, the victory was both deeply personal and emblematic of a broader triumph for individual rights over bureaucratic tyranny. His tractor, once used as a pawn in Kerren's power games, now stood as a symbol of resilience and community defiance. At a celebratory gathering on his farm, neighbors shared food, laughter, and stories of past grievances. The atmosphere was electric with hope, as families toasted to newfound freedom and the promise of a future where personal property and family traditions were respected. Cole, with a quiet smile, sipped his lemonade on the porch while watching children play safely in the fields, no longer at the mercy of arbitrary rules. The once oppressive presence of the HOA had crumbled beneath the weight of its own corruption, and the community vowed never to allow such tyranny to take root again. Following Kerren's expulsion, the legal repercussions for the HOA were swift and uncompromising. A class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of the residents, alleging mismanagement, fraud, and the systematic abuse of power that had characterized Kerren's tenure. Cole's extensive documentation, spanning security footage, photographic evidence, and affidavits from fellow homeowners, became the cornerstone of a case that captured the attention of local courts. In a tense courtroom drama, one by one, residents testified about the myriad violations they had suffered, from baseless fines for public disturbances to invasive inspections that stripped away their sense of privacy. The judge, clearly moved by the overwhelming evidence, declared, "This court finds that the HOA, under the direction of Kerren Leland, has systematically violated the rights of its members. The HOA is hereby fined and restructured under new, transparent leadership." The ruling was met with relief and celebration among the homeowners. The legal verdict not only forced accountability on the errant board members, but also set a precedent for how HOA abuses of power would be handled in the future. Local authorities pledged to tighten oversight on community associations, ensuring that no homeowner would ever again be subjected to such arbitrary enforcement. Cole, standing amid a sea of supportive neighbors, felt a deep sense of vindication. His quiet determination had sparked a movement that reclaimed not only his tractor, but the dignity of an entire community. The legal collapse of the HOA marked the definitive end of an era of tyranny and the beginning of a new chapter defined by fairness, transparency, and respect for individual rights. With the legal verdict final and the community's support unwavering, Kerren Leland's personal life began to unravel. Once the unchallenged enforcer of HOA rules, she now found herself the subject of public ridicule and scorn. The lavish lifestyle she had boasted, a collection of high-end cars, designer wardrobes, and an aura of invincibility, crumbled under the scrutiny of both legal investigators and a resentful community. Local news channels replayed the security footage of her humiliating attempt to seize control of Cole's tractor, and social media buzzed with memes and biting commentary. Former allies distanced themselves, and whispers of scandal spread rapidly. In a final crushing blow to her pride, Kerren was forced to accept a position as an assistant property manager for a small, run-down HOA in a neighboring town, a role that left no room for the power and authority she once wielded. One crisp morning, as Cole was checking his fields, he spotted Kerren shuffling out of her new, unassuming office building. He exchanged a knowing glance with a neighbor and with a quiet chuckle remarked, "I hope you enjoy following orders, Kerren." Her once impregnable facade was now reduced to bitter irony, a living reminder that unchecked power always invites accountability. Kerren's downfall was complete, her reputation in ruins, her influence extinguished. The community's long-festering grievances had finally been vindicated, and every act of petty tyranny had been repaid in full. In the months that followed, the oppressive shadow of Kerren's rule faded, replaced by a renewed spirit of autonomy and community pride. Cole Matthews's farm, with its sprawling fields and the vintage tractor that had become a symbol of defiance, now stood as a beacon of resilience. The tractor's controls, once locked in protest of unauthorized play, had been restored, but the memory of that small victory lingered as a reminder of what had been overcome. At a sun-dappled neighborhood barbecue held on Cole's sprawling lawn, residents gathered to celebrate their hard-won triumph. Laughter mingled with the soft hum of conversation as neighbors reminisced about the turbulent days under Kerren's reign. In a moment of light-hearted rebellion, someone produced a playful violation notice for excessive tractor tampering, and with a wink, handed it to Cole. Smiling broadly, Cole raised the faux citation and declared, "They really tried, but in the end, our community's spirit could never be locked down." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, their voices echoing the triumph of individuality over arbitrary control. As twilight fell and the stars emerged one by one over the peaceful fields, Cole sat quietly on his porch. He gazed out over the land that had been his sanctuary, now free from the tyranny of a misguided HOA. In that serene moment, with a soft rustle of corn and the gentle murmur of neighborly voices in the background, it was clear. While tyrants may rise and fall, the true spirit of community endures and will always prevail. Fade to black.